I was 12 years old when my parents told me they were getting a divorce. I thought it was the end of my world. But what I didn't know was that it was actually the beginning of my journey toward understanding love, loyalty, and forgiveness. For years, I was angry at both of them. Angry that they couldn't make it work. Angry that they made me choose sides. Angry that my family, as I knew it, was being destroyed. But then I learned something that changed everything. This is Hearts Mended, where real stories show us that broken bonds can heal, and second chances are never too late. If your parents are divorced, if you've ever felt torn between two people you love, subscribe, like this video, and share your story in the comments. Because healing begins when we share our truth. My parents' love story seemed perfect. At least, that's what I believed when I was a child. My mother, Sarah, was a high school teacher, warm, nurturing, creative. My father, James, was a lawyer, intelligent, ambitious, driven. They met in college, fell in love, got married. They had my brother when they were 27. Then they had me, 3 years later. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. Nice house in the suburbs. 2 kids. Stable jobs. We took family vacations. We celebrated holidays together. We looked like we had it all. But as I got older, I started noticing things. Small things at first. The way my parents would stop talking when I entered a room. The way they would communicate through me, tell your father dinner is ready instead of saying it directly. The way they would sleep in separate bedrooms, explaining it as a snoring situation. I was too young to understand what I was seeing. But I was old enough to feel the tension. My brother didn't seem to notice. He was 3 years older than me, already focused on his own life, friends, sports, school. But I was different. I was sensitive to the emotional undercurrents in our home. I could feel when my parents were angry at each other, even when they weren't speaking. When I was 10 years old, my parents had their first big fight that I witnessed. It was over something small, the way my father had spoken to my mother, dismissing something she said. But it escalated quickly. Suddenly, they were yelling. Suddenly, old resentments were being thrown around like weapons. "You never listen to me," my mother screamed. "Because you never say anything worth hearing," my father shot back. I remember running to my room and covering my ears with a pillow. I remember my brother coming in and sitting on my bed without saying anything. We didn't need words. We both knew that something fundamental had broken in our home. After that fight, things were different. They weren't as bad as that night, but they were never the same. There was a coldness in our home. A distance between my parents that I couldn't bridge, no matter how well I behaved or how good my grades were. I became a people pleaser. I thought that if I was good enough, if I got straight A's, if I was kind to everyone, if I kept the peace at home, maybe my parents would remember why they loved each other. Maybe I could save my family. It was a futile mission. But I didn't know that yet. When I was 12 years old, my parents sat me and my brother down and told us they were getting a divorce. I remember my father saying, "This isn't about you kids. We both love you very much. We're just not happy with each other anymore." I remember thinking, if you loved us so much, why couldn't you stay together for us? But I didn't say it. I just sat there, numb. My brother asked practical questions. Where will we live? Will we go to the same school? My brother was always practical. I asked, why? My parents looked at each other, and I could see the pain in their eyes. But pain doesn't fix anything. Pain doesn't keep families together. We've just grown apart, my mother said quietly. Sometimes people change. Sometimes they want different things. What I heard was, you failed. You failed to keep us together. You failed to be enough to make us want to stay. I didn't understand that divorce wasn't about me. All I understood was that my family was breaking apart, and I couldn't stop it. Have you ever felt responsible for your parents' relationship? Have you ever thought that if you were just good enough, they wouldn't leave? The divorce process was brutal. Not in the way that divorces are portrayed in movies, with screaming fights and thrown dishes. It was brutal in its coldness. My parents were amicable. They had lawyers. They worked out custody arrangements. They divided assets. But underneath all that civility was a war. My mother needed my father to be the bad guy. She needed me to understand that she was the victim, that she had tried everything, that he had abandoned our family. My father needed me to understand his side. He told me that my mother was controlling, that she had stopped supporting his career, that he had felt stifled in the marriage. And I was caught in the middle, hearing both sides, unable to choose one without betraying the other. My brother handled it better than I did. He was older, more independent. He could compartmentalize. He could be with our father on weekends and with our mother during the week without it destroying him. But I was 13, 14, 15, the most emotionally vulnerable years of my adolescence. And I was being asked to take sides in a war I didn't start and couldn't end. I became angry. Angry at both of them. Angry at my father because he had left. Angry at my mother because she had let him. Angry at both of them because they were being selfish, because they weren't thinking about what this was doing to me, because they were forcing me to choose. And I did choose. Over time, I chose my mother. It was partly because I was with her more. I spent weekdays with her and weekends with my father. It was partly because she was more emotionally available, more willing to talk about her pain. And it was partly because my father seemed distant, even in his own sadness. My father would pick me up on Friday nights, and we would sit in the car in awkward silence. He would ask about school. I would give one-word answers. He would try to plan something fun for the weekend. I would resist. I was punishing him. I was making him feel my pain. By the time I was 16, my relationship with my father was almost non-existent. I would go through the motions of spending time with him, but my heart wasn't in it. I resented him for leaving. I resented him for the pain he had caused. I resented him for not fighting harder to keep our family together. My mother, sensing my alignment, became closer to me. She would confide in me in ways that weren't appropriate for a parent-child relationship. She would tell me about her pain, her fears, her regrets. She would tell me how much she needed me. And I carried that burden. I became her emotional support. I became the person she leaned on to survive the divorce. My brother saw what was happening, and he tried to warn me. "You can't take sides," he said once, when I was venting to him about our father. "It's not fair to you. And it's not fair to Dad." "He deserves it," I said. He left us. He didn't leave us, my brother said. He left Mom. Those are two different things. But I wasn't ready to hear that. I was too angry. Too hurt. Too convinced that my father was the villain and my mother was the victim. The years of my adolescence became a minefield of resentment and divided loyalty. I excelled in school, I made friends, I built a life. But underneath it all, I was carrying the weight of my parents' failed marriage, and I was making sure that my father knew that I blamed him for it. When your parents divorce, do you have the right to take sides? Or does that just perpetuate the pain? When I was 18, I left for college in a different state. I told myself it was because of the school, because of the program, because of the location. But the truth was, I was running away. I was running away from my mother's neediness, from my father's disappointment, from the constant tension of being caught between them. College was supposed to be my escape. And it was. But it was also when I started to see my family situation with new eyes. In college, I met people with different family situations. I met kids whose parents were still together but miserable. I met kids whose divorced parents were happy and peaceful. I met kids whose parents had moved on and built new lives. And I started to question the narrative I had been telling myself. My therapist, yes, I started therapy in college, helped me see something I had been avoiding. My parents' divorce wasn't my father's fault. And it wasn't my mother's fault. It was both of their faults. And it was neither of their faults. It was just what happened. People grow apart, my therapist said. People change. Sometimes they want different things. That's not evil. That's just human. For years, I had needed my father to be the villain. It made my anger justified. It made my mother the victim, which meant I was the victim too. But what my therapist was asking me to consider was even harder. What if they were both just people? Flawed people who loved me, but who couldn't make their marriage work. During my freshman year of college, my father called me. I almost didn't answer. We didn't have a close relationship at that point. We would text occasionally about logistics, when I would visit, how I was doing in school. But we didn't really talk. "Hi," he said when I answered. His voice sounded tired. "Hi," I said, suspicious. "I was wondering if you might want to come home for a weekend soon," he said. "We could spend some time together. Just you and me." My first instinct was to make an excuse. I didn't want to spend time with him. I didn't want to forgive him. I wanted to maintain my anger because it was familiar and it was safe. But something in his voice, something vulnerable and hopeful, made me say yes. I went home that weekend. My father picked me up from the train station, and we drove to his apartment, the place he had moved to after the divorce, a small two-bedroom that I had only visited a handful of times. We sat down at his kitchen table, and he said something I wasn't prepared for. "I owe you an apology." I looked at him, shocked. "I've been thinking a lot about how I handled the divorce," he continued. "And I realized that I wasn't there for you the way I should have been. I was so wrapped up in my own pain that I didn't see your pain. I left you to fend for yourself, emotionally. And I'm sorry. I didn't know how to respond. For so long, I had been waiting for him to acknowledge the pain he had caused. But now that he was doing it, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would feel. Instead, I felt sad. I felt sad for him. I felt sad for me. I felt sad for all the years we had lost because neither of us knew how to talk about what we were feeling. Why didn't you fight harder? I asked him. For the marriage? For us? My father was quiet for a long time. Because I was scared, he finally said. I was scared that if I tried and failed, it would prove that I wasn't enough. And I think I was more afraid of that than I was afraid of losing your mother. So I just gave up. For the first time, I saw my father not as the villain who had abandoned me, but as a man who was scared and broken, just like everyone else. I'm sorry too, I said, surprising myself. I blamed you for everything. I didn't try to understand your side. I just wanted you to be the bad guy. I understand, my father said. And honestly, I deserved some of that blame. But I hope we can try to know each other again. Not as a perfect father and daughter, but as two people who love each other and who are both doing the best we can. That was the beginning. Not the end of our healing, but the beginning. When you finally understand your parents as flawed human beings instead of as perfect parents or complete villains, does everything change? A few months after that weekend with my father, I went home to spend time with my mother. She was excited to see me, cooking my favorite meals, planning activities. She was also, I realized, expecting me to be the same daughter I had been before college, the one who was her emotional support, her confidant, her person. We were sitting in the kitchen after dinner, and my mother said something that made me realize I needed to have another difficult conversation. I'm so glad you're home, she said. You're the only person who really understands what I've been through. The only one who gets how hard this has been for me. And I realized, I had never actually forgiven my mother. I had just been on her side. And being on someone's side isn't the same as forgiving them. Mom, I said carefully, I need to talk to you about something. My mother's face changed immediately. She could sense that this was serious. I've been thinking a lot about the divorce, I said. And about what happened with Dad and me. What about it? My mother asked, defensive. I've been angry at Dad for years, I said. But I've been thinking, part of the reason he and I grew so distant is because I chose to align with you. And I think you let me do that. I think you needed me on your side. And that wasn't fair to me. My mother's face crumpled. I was struggling, she said. You have no idea how hard it was for me. I know it was hard, I said. I know the divorce was painful. But you're an adult, and I'm your child. You should have protected me from the adult dynamics of the divorce. Instead, you made me your therapist. You made me the person you depended on to process your pain. And that wasn't okay. My mother started crying. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. I was just trying to survive. I know, I said. And I understand that now. But I also need to tell you that I'm not angry at Dad anymore. And I'm not going to pretend to be on your side against him. Because they were both my parents. And they both failed me in different ways. But they both also did the best they could with what they had. This was the harder forgiveness. Because forgiving my father meant I had to stop being my mother's ally. And my mother wasn't ready for that. Over the next few months, my mother and I had several difficult conversations. She struggled with the idea that I wouldn't be her emotional support anymore. She struggled with the idea that I could forgive my father. She struggled with the idea that I could see her as flawed, not as a victim. But slowly, she came around. Because I was also honest about my perspective. I told her, I love you. But I'm not your therapist. And I'm not going to pretend that Dad is the bad guy when I don't believe that anymore. I told her, the divorce hurt me. And some of that hurt came from things you did. And I forgive you for that. But I need you to understand what you did so that we can move forward together. I told her, I want to have a real relationship with you. Not a codependent one. A real one, where you're my mother and I'm your daughter, and we love each other and support each other, but you don't need me to be your emotional crutch. It was hard. My mother resisted at first. But eventually, she began to understand. And more importantly, she began to see the role she had played in my pain. Is it harder to forgive the parent who was on your side or the parent who was the villain? Which forgiveness costs more? Forgiveness after your parents' divorce is different from other kinds of forgiveness. It's not just about forgiving your parents for their individual failures. It's about forgiving them for breaking your family. It's about forgiving them for putting you in an impossible position. It's about forgiving them for not being able to stay together for the sake of your emotional well-being. But it's also about forgiving yourself. I had to forgive myself for the years I spent aligned with my mother against my father. I had to forgive myself for pushing my father away when he was trying to reach out. I had to forgive myself for being too young and too hurt to understand that my parents were also just humans trying to survive a painful situation. And I had to forgive myself for the resentment I carried, which was doing nothing but poisoning my own life. When I turned 20, I made a decision. I was going to rebuild my relationship with my father. Not as a way to punish my mother. Not as a way to take sides. But as a way to honor the reality that my father loved me and wanted to be in my life, and I wanted him in it too. I started calling him more often. I started visiting on weekends. I started letting him know about my life, my struggles, my successes, my fears. And my father, in turn, became present. He wasn't trying to be the perfect father. He was just trying to be a real father, showing up, listening, being honest about his own struggles. One weekend, we went for a walk in the park, and I said something I had needed to say for a long time. I forgive you. For the divorce. For not being there for me when it happened. For being distant all these years. I forgive you. My father stopped walking. He turned to me, and there were tears in his eyes. I forgive you too, he said. For holding a grudge against me. For pushing me away. For believing I didn't love you. I forgive you for all of it. I didn't do anything wrong, I said. You don't have to forgive me. You were a kid, he said. You were hurt and confused and angry. You did the best you could with what you had. Just like I did. Just like your mother did. We all did the best we could. And I realized something fundamental. Forgiveness isn't about determining who was right and who was wrong. Forgiveness is about recognizing that everyone involved was doing the best they could with the information and emotional capacity they had at the time. My parents didn't stay together to make me happy. But that doesn't mean they didn't love me. And my father's distance during the divorce wasn't about not caring, it was about his own pain and his own inability to process complex emotions. And my mother's neediness wasn't about manipulating me, it was about her desperation to survive a painful situation. Understanding this didn't erase the pain, but it transformed it into something I could carry without letting it destroy me. I also had to forgive my parents for something else, for not modeling healthy love. I had inherited their patterns. I had inherited their fear of abandonment. I had inherited their difficulty with emotional vulnerability. But recognizing that inheritance meant I could choose something different. I could choose to heal in ways my parents never did. I could choose to be more emotionally aware, more honest in my relationships, more willing to work through conflict instead of running away from it. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift they could give me, not a perfect family, but the opportunity to heal myself and build a healthier life than the one they had. Is forgiveness about forgetting what happened? Or is it about understanding why it happened and choosing to move forward anyway? 5 years after my parents' divorce. 5 years into rebuilding my relationships with both of them. I'm 23 years old now. I'm in graduate school studying family therapy. My parents are both remarried, my father to a wonderful woman named Linda, my mother to a kind man named David. They have both built happy lives. And I have rebuilt my relationships with both of them. This doesn't mean everything is perfect. My family will never look like it did before the divorce. I don't have the nuclear family I thought I was supposed to have. But what I have now is something more valuable, honest, real relationships with two people who love me and who I love in return. My father and I talk weekly. We have dinner together once a month. He came to my college graduation. He's proud of my work in family therapy, which is partly inspired by my own journey. My mother and I also have a close relationship, but it's different now. It's healthier. She's no longer my emotional crutch, and I'm no longer hers. We're a mother and daughter who love each other, not two people bound together by trauma and codependency. Recently, both my parents and their new spouses came to my graduate school presentation about intergenerational trauma and family healing. After the presentation, they all came up to me. My father said, "I'm proud of you. For doing the work to heal. For not letting our mistakes define you." My mother said, "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand my role in your pain. But I'm grateful for your patience and your forgiveness." And I realized something, my parents' divorce didn't break me. It challenged me. It hurt me. But it also taught me something crucial about forgiveness and resilience. I've learned that forgiveness isn't about absolving someone of responsibility. It's about recognizing their humanity. It's about understanding that they did the best they could with the emotional tools they had. And it's about choosing to move forward without letting bitterness poison your own life. I've learned that divorce is not always a failure. Sometimes it's a brave choice to acknowledge that two people aren't right for each other and to choose happiness over staying in a situation that doesn't serve anyone. I've learned that kids can survive divorce. Not unscathed, but surviving means learning, growing, healing. It means building resilience. It means understanding yourself on a deeper level. My brother and I talk about our parents' divorce sometimes. He says, "I think we're actually going to be better partners and parents because of what we went through. We're going to know what to avoid. We're going to understand the impact our choices have on our kids. And I think he's right. The divorce was painful. The aftermath was complicated. The healing took years. But I came out the other side stronger, more compassionate, more understanding of human complexity. My parents are not perfect. But they're my parents. And I love them. Not despite their failures, but partly because of them. Because their failures taught me what matters. They taught me about resilience. They taught me about forgiveness. And most importantly, they taught me that love isn't about being perfect. Love is about showing up, even when it's hard. Love is about doing the work to understand each other. Love is about choosing to stay connected, even when disconnection feels easier. I don't know if my parents would be together if they could go back in time. And I'm not sure it matters anymore. What matters is that they loved me enough to stay present in my life, even when their relationship fell apart. What matters is that I loved them enough to forgive them. What matters is that all of us, my parents, their new spouses, my brother, and me, chose connection over bitterness. And that choice changed everything. Can you forgive your parents for their divorce? Can you understand that sometimes love isn't enough to keep people together? Divorce breaks families apart. But it doesn't have to break us as individuals. If my story moved you, if you're a child of divorce who's still struggling to forgive, if you're in a difficult place with your parents, if you've ever felt like your family was broken beyond repair, you're not alone. Like this video. Comment below with your own story. Tell me, have you forgiven your parents for their divorce? How did you heal? Let's build a community of people who understand that divorce is complicated, that forgiveness is possible, and that family looks different for different people. Subscribe to Hearts Mended so you never miss another story of redemption, forgiveness, and hope. And if you're going through a divorce right now, if you're a parent trying to navigate this with your kids, or if you're a kid still angry at your parents for breaking up your family, remember this: healing is possible. Understanding is possible. Forgiveness is possible. It takes time, but it's possible. Thank you for being here. Thank you for witnessing my story. And thank you for believing that hearts can truly be mended. We'll see you next week with another story of hope.